Go ahead and get started. I'll still be admitting people as we kind of go through today. Hopefully everybody's had a good week. It's good to see everybody's faces. Not as good as seeing you in person, but it'll do for now. So we have not a lot to cover tonight, but obviously we have a few things. A little bit of housekeeping, and I'll try to usually do the housekeeping stuff for the most part at the beginning of class, even though it's not sort of the best teaching pedagogy. But and so I will start off there tonight a little bit. Also, I want to talk a little bit about, of course, the Model UN program very briefly tonight. Next week, I'll actually have a couple of students who are still actually at Cal State. My two program assistants for that program will actually come and speak, at least one of them, and one of them is actually your ASI president for our university. In fact, I just got off this with her because I have back-to-back meetings since like noon, and you guys are the last of my meetings on Zoom today. So, but I was just talking to her, and she, Graciela is her name, Moran, and she offered to come and preach the gospel of Model UN, I guess. But needless to say, come and talk to you guys about the program. So, so let me share my slides with you, kind of go through what we're going to do tonight. Give me 1 second. Yeah, that's 2. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay, so so basically tonight, get over here where I can see what I'm doing. There we go. We'll start kind of every class after obviously last Wednesday when I first met all of you, kind of checking in with everybody. I think that's vitally important. I do that even in the physical class to see if anybody has questions, but I think it's even more important. When I say checking in, by the way, it's not just about, oh, I have a question about something in the class. This is also a way, I think, just in this current environment for me to check in on you and sort of provide you whatever support I can with those resources. Let me move your faces over to a different side so I don't look like I keep looking that way to the other third screen. But basically, this is also, so if things do come up that you feel like it's good for the group, this is the time, of course, to also bring those up as well, because we're all in this together. You know, something you'll hear me say over and over again, and I think that's vitally important, particularly because many of you, this is your first term at Cal State. Boy, what a way to come in as a transfer student. But needless to say, and even those of you who've been with us for some time, this is unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever happened before, obviously, and we want to make sure that I want to make sure you have as much support as possible. So always feel free during this time to bring up things where I can hopefully support you. And then tonight we're going to talk about sort of what is the real power of the United Nations. And this alludes to a lot of the comments you guys made in the Think Pair shares, as well as some of the conversations I had at the end of class last week. So I want to come back and talk about kind of real life applications. Disregard the screaming children in the background. I apologize. My girls are louder than my son, so they have very good loud voices. But needless to say, we will talk a little bit about the real power of the United Nations tonight, and then kind of tie that in with the SDGs. Obviously, the readings for this week are from the Chasik, I'll call it Pam's book, even though there's 3 authors, Dr. Chasik's book on the development of the SDGs. And I don't expect you to be experts on the SDGs by the end of this class. What I use that book for is really to show you how you can apply what we're talking about in a more theoretical sense in week A to something that's more realistic in what's currently going on in the UN system. So week B is always sort of like grounding everything we're doing, hopefully in that particular instance as much as possible, okay? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's start with a little bit about checking in with you. Any questions from last week? Any of the material as we were going through, things you needed clarity on? This is sort of the time. I know this is, for most of you, this is all brand new information. I'm not expecting you to become experts in global governance in 16 weeks. So this is really just to get you interested in it, and hopefully maybe beyond this, even not necessarily in school, just get to learn a little bit more about what we're doing. So any questions or comments for the good of the group? And then, of course, I think I sent out an email, but if I didn't, I apologize. This has been a very crazy week, so I'm a little bit behind on a couple of things. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I believe I did say at the end of last week, but I will repost the links to it. Both books for the class are now available online through the library for free. As you are a student, you have access to them. If you don't have them, I know somebody had emailed me, and I think I did get back to them about, just go on to the link or look it up in the file library for both books by the ISBN. But both of them are now unlimited viewership. So hopefully you guys have been taking advantage of that if you hadn't already bought the books. If you had already bought the books, then I apologize. We didn't know we would actually have them free when this all started. And we actually have to put our book orders in almost like 6 months ahead of time. It's crazy the amount of actual time, time frame that we have to do. So for those of you, I saw, and a couple of people said, they were having trouble, they got bounced out. Always just feel free to jump back in. It's technology, it's not foolproof. Don't worry, I'm not kicking you out. If it does happen, just always come back in. Obviously, I can see that some people have kind of went in and out, and that's just about the connection. The thing I've discovered, there's a lot of classes at 4 o'clock in the afternoon right now, so we're not the only ones probably on Zoom. So you can imagine the amount of people just from our university alone trying to jump on at one time. How is everybody's week going? Let me ask more on a mental health level. Is there anything I can help you? Have the videos helped? Let me ask you that we're posting. I know I haven't posted the micro lectures. I'll talk about that in a minute. But have the videos that I posted so far, have they been helping you kind of further understand what we're studying in this class? By the not thumbs up, I like that. That's always good. I would teach you how to use all the different symbols, but I try to show my daughters, and they're not smarter than I for their classes, and I can't even figure it out. So my daughter's just always like this, and I'm muting herself in her classes. So, but needless to say, if you have any recommendation anytime during the class of how you think it would help you better understand the material, always feel free to let me know. This is our class. This is a collective, right? And so I want you guys to get the most out of it. And sometimes what I think makes sense from my perspective doesn't always make sense to all of you. It's been it's been some time since I've been a student. I mean, the last time I was actually taking a class was 2005, and that was in doctoral school. So it's been 25 years since I was at Cal State as an undergrad. So, which is longer than some of you have been alive. So always feel free. I always want to get your perspective and your feedback, and I'll ask for that. And also because it's the first time we've taught this class, not just this way, but also, and so the alerts, by the way, I will say, thank you, Lucera, that we do have the remind system. I think I sent an email out. I'll resend that out because I know some people added the class later. Remind, which a lot of K through 12 use as well as universities, is just a way for, if you want to be added, then what will happen is I just send it out from my old text phone. Don't worry, it's not a flip phone, but it's an older phone. And so I can just send you a quick message when things are coming due. And remind you of those kind of things. Also, if you don't prefer that, I always send reminders out, obviously, on email as well. So anything in that area, always let me know. Okay. And there's no. The question that Darlene asked me, no, it's not. Okay. Any questions, concerns before we move on? No? Okay, let me switch screens here real quickly. I'm going to show you something else. Give me 1 second. Just realized I did not log into the website I was going to show you. Okay, there we go. So let me switch my sharing here to a different screen. Okay, hopefully in front of you should be a website, hopefully now. Is that correct? Okay. So one of the things I mentioned to you last week, and more than a few of you, and I usually don't go real in depth into this early on, but obviously the kind of class you're in, it elicits this. One of the things we have at Cal State San Bernardino is a Model United Nations program. What that is simply is, it's a way for us to simulate the inner workings of the UN system, what you're studying with me for the next now 15 weeks. And so every year, I'm giving you the very highlights basically, is every university participates in these conferences. They're assigned a country to represent. And once they do that, we prepare students to represent that country. So as a entire university, we represent one country. So for example, last year it was going to be Ecuador, but of course the conference got canceled right in the middle of COVID-19. We were getting ready to leave for New York like 2 weeks later after all this happened. So it got canceled right before we left. But I took a team to Germany last year, to Erfurt, Germany, and they participated. So we do take a group of students every year. There's a process in which you get selected. So if you go to this website, csusb.edu/model-UN, or just type in CSUSB Model UN on Google, you'll find it very easily. It's one of the first pages that comes up. There's all sorts of information on the actual website here. How to join goes into details on the tab. You can look into that a little bit. But the simple basic thing is that you fill out an online application, which was supposed to open yesterday, will be opening later tonight. And basically you fill out this online application, you take a exam, which is 50 questions, multiple choice, that covers a wide range of areas, and mostly international. So international politics, international law, international organizations. So a lot of the things we're covering in this class will help prepare you for that test. And so when you see it, it'll be like, oh, well, that was a question from our quiz, that kind of thing. And then basically, we then take the top people who've been, we grade your application with the rubric I have, as well as the raw score from your test, and we combine those two scores and we just make a blind cut without names. And so, for example, if we need, let's say, 20 people on the team, we'll take the top, let's say, 40 out of whatever the pool is. And so those people are brought back, and then you do kind of what I call stage 2 selection, which is a panel interview. And of course, it'll be virtual this year on Zoom. And that is with myself, Professor Sina Bastami, who's my co-faculty advisor starting this year, as well as our 2 program assistants, which this year is Graciela Moran, our ASI president, as well as Sofia Alvarez Lopez, and then an alumni of our program. And now that we're all virtual, it could be from almost anywhere. We have alumni of our program across the world. So it's just whoever volunteers, and usually there's a waiting list of them wanting to still participate. So you come in 15 minutes, we interview you, we ask you some questions, get to know you a little bit better as a candidate. And then once we do that, then based on that interview alone, we make the final cut. And then you're invited to come back to actually be on the team. Now, to be on the team, there's a couple requirements. So let's say you've been through that process. Number one is you have to have taken this class you're taking with me, 5150. You either have to take it at the same time, but in your guys' cases, we'll assume you will all graduate and get A's in my class this term, that you will actually already have met that requirement because you have taken it this term for your GE. You also have to enroll in another class. So that is, let's say some of you apply and you get to that stage of the process of selection. You don't have to take 5150 again. You've already completed it after this term. You do have to enroll in the spring Model UN practicum, which is like geography. I should remember the numbers, but it's all blurred to me right now. I think it's like 57, 53 or something like that. And there's one for fall and one for spring. You can repeat those classes up to 6 times. So you can do Model UN the entire time you're with us, from freshman all the way through, including into graduate school. The units, there's 3 unit classes, and that class for the team just prepares you to go to the conference. Whereas this class teaches you about the UN. That's why this class is required either at the same time or prior to you applying, because that way I don't have to cover that same material over again, which is what we did up until we converted to semesters. So, okay. Your travel, once we go back to actually being able to travel anywhere, is paid for by the university. It's actually through what we call instructional related activity fee, which you all pay as students. And it covers things like the Coyote Chronicle, Coyote Radio, a bunch of things on our campus. Model UN happens to be one of them. And in the spring, we take students to New York City. In the fall, it's always an international location. So we've taken students to South Korea, We've taken students, these are all students I've taken the last 12 years. So we've been to South Korea, we've been to Germany last year, we've been to Banff, Canada, we've been to Czech Republic, Prague, and then over to Olomouc. And so this year was supposed to be, right now in the fall, it was supposed to be Japan, but as you can imagine, that got canceled. Next year, it's back in the Czech Republic. And so it is really amazing locations, a great experience. It actually, we're going to be building out the fall so that you can get study abroad units as well for that. So there is ways, no matter what your major is, to really add things towards your degree and have it covered. I will tell you the Model UN units actually often, most chairs of departments will let you count them for your degree programs. In my department, no problem, because I'm the chair, first of all, but also we've always supported it. Definitely poli-sci, Dr. Janiski, almost all the chairs in the College of Social Behavioral Sciences, definitely in business, the Jack Brown School of Business and Public Administration. Bio, it's tough. Dr. Chow is very supportive of Model UN, but because your guys' program is kind of structured, he's very cautious to count it for those. But you do need elective units most often to graduate nowadays. So yeah. So if you do get ready to apply and you're from a major and you're thinking, well, I don't know if it'll count. 1, talk to your chair. 2, talk to me. All of us chairs meet every 2 weeks. We just had our meeting today. So it's easy enough for me to just ask them at our meeting, like, hey, such and such is applying. Will you count it towards the degree? In the past, we've actually had the chair of mathematics count it for a mathematics degree, English. Way back in the day, biology did, but it's a little bit different now depending on which track you're doing. But we've had nursing students in the program, you name it. I mean, it's been across the university. So you don't have to be from a social science discipline. You can be from any other discipline as well. And we actually draw from all the colleges. So just something to think about. That's kind of that. You can go on the website and look more into it. There's actually a video, which I don't have linked on the page yet, where there's 2 former students talking about the program, Jeffrey Bonga and Yusra Sirhan. And Yusra actually is now a first-year law student at University of San Diego as of this last week. And she's on a full-ride scholarship to pay for law school. And she credits a big part of that to what she did in Model UN. The other part of it is Jeffrey Bonga is working actually as up in Sacramento in the legislative, in the California Assembly now. We have people who went on to do their PhDs. I actually am an alumni of the program I run now. I did it as a student 25 years ago, and I've been able to speak on the floor of the UN and work with diplomats and heads of state and a couple presidents as well. And I got my degree just like all of you did from Cal State San Bernardino. So Model UN, definitely, as students will tell you, and I'll let them tell their story next week, life-changing for sure. Because I definitely would not be doing what I do today. I know it's hard to believe, but I used to be the quietest one in class. Model UN kind of changed that, made me a loudmouth. So, okay. Questions before I move on?
Just an aside, since it's not technically related to Model UN. Mm-hmm. I want to do it anyways, but I also noticed how it said on the website there's a Model Arab League. Is that still a thing or no?
As of right now, it's on a hiatus. We're going to bring that back probably after COVID, once we get through this whole craziness of COVID-19. We have not been able to do it yet, primarily just because of location. But we did have actually a Model Arab League program for 20 plus years, and we were the top program nationally. In fact, when I came in, the reason we stopped doing it is I couldn't do everything, is really what it came down to. And now that I have a co-advisor, we probably will definitely be bringing back Model Arab League, hopefully next year is our plan. This year probably is kind of out just because of everything that's going on. And we will be doing the New York conference in the spring. They're going to be doing the one in New York as both either a hybrid or in person, depending on how things go. And so we're hoping to be, and so that's a great experience. If you've never been to New York City, the very first time I ever went to New York City was with Model UN. And it was actually coming across that bridge. And it's really at that point that I decided to do the kind of work I do today and go on to work with the United Nations and do the stuff I do. So it's a great experience. And if you're thinking, well, I have family, I have other stuff. I've had people have kids on the team. I've had multiple married couples on the team. you name it. Everybody, people that were, I think the oldest person I've had on the team was 60. The youngest was Yusra. The first year she was on the team as a freshman, she actually turned 18 right before we left, and she could sign actually the waivers and stuff as a now no longer minor. So it's really open to whoever wants to do it. And so if you're interested, let me know, and we'll talk more about it as well. And Model Arab League as well. Definitely let me know if you're interested in that, because if we have enough people, we'll bring it back sooner, hopefully. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I would love to do that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, it's good. Let's move on then. So let's move on to some class work. So a couple things, just checking in wise. Micro lectures, I deeply apologize. I meant to actually have them up and worked on them, and as inevitable, technology doesn't always work great. So those will be posted. Micro lectures, by the way, are going to be a combination this term. They're not just going to be the stuff that I create for week B. It'll also be videos. So I've already posted, I think, 4 videos, I believe, in the module folder for you. So if you haven't been there since yesterday, I posted them yesterday. The micro lectures and that material will be posted all throughout week B. Okay, so please make sure if you ever have questions, thank you to those who've emailed me to ask, like, hey, we just wanted to know if I was missing something. Always feel free to, don't feel like you're bothering me. Yes, I'm busy, but at the end of the day, I want you to actually bother me and say, hey, I had some questions about something. What I don't want you to do is get to the end of the term and not be able to perform as well as I think you possibly can. And I know how good you guys are. I've read your post. So, I know the quality of your work now because I've seen all your writings. Also, I generally, as some of you know, will reach out to you if I think you're missing assignments, just so I can make sure that you all stay on track as well. It takes a little bit more time out of mine, but at the end of the day, this is my job, is to serve you. And so that's kind of part of what I do, is to try to help you. It's not to big brother you, by the way. But, and if you do have problems or issues arise, life is tough right now. And so if you do have things come up, let me know. I've been doing this for a long time. I know if people are just trying to get away with something. I also have 3 kids, so I definitely know. They're younger and much smarter than I was. So, okay. So let's go ahead and talk about, let me share my screen again. Let's see here, where we at? There we go. Okay. So you should be back on, hopefully. Bring you back over here. Every time I click on something, you guys move from one screen to the next. I have to move you back around a little bit. So hopefully you have my slides in front of you. Is that correct? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what the real power of the United Nations is. A lot of you talked about, remember in the Think, Pair, Share, I asked the question of, I gave you that very famous Dag Hammarskjöld quote, which is still one of my favorite quotes of all time. And asked you kind of reflect on, do you think the UN is really achieving the mission in which it was stated? And and I will tell you, all of you gave really, really good, I thought really amazing replies. And there wasn't one that I disagreed with, because realistically, yes, they have in some areas, and some areas they haven't. So the question then is why, right? That's really where we kind of start this process. Because to understand, like starting next week with the General Assembly and then the following week the Security Council, how do those things function what do they look like on paper is one thing, but how do they actually really function is really, really important. So I want to talk a little bit about then, sort of what are the community members and their responsibilities, and how does that play out when we talk about power relationships? So what I'm going to kind of relate to, and one of the things I would ask you kind of to do throughout this class is to go to the UN website, www.un.org. It's in all the languages. So if you speak another languages other than English as your first language, use that. So, I know my audience. So if Spanish is your primary language initially, then do what's most comfortable for you. It is in German, it's in Spanish, it's in Mandarin, it's in Arabic, it's in a variety of languages, the entire website. And so go on there and really kind of play around and look at sort of what does the UN say about itself. I think that's very important as well, because one of the things we talked about last week is a lot of you in your post related to the fact that UN should tell its story better. Like they don't really tell what they do. And so I think you getting a sense of that. But the other reason is on there you will find the UN Charter. And that might be something you just want to bookmark on your web browser. because we're going to keep coming back to the charter. The charter, remember, is really what gave the structure to the United Nations and how it functions and for all intents and purposes today. And so that's really what you want to really keep in mind is as we talk about the UN, we're going to come back to kind of week A, talking about what does the UN Charter say, what is the structure, and then week B, does it really operate that way? And I'll give you a little prelude to that. It doesn't. And so we're going to keep coming back to why that doesn't happen. So let's start with, of course, a couple of articles, and that is really what is the power of the countries, right? UN member states. Those are the countries that belong to the United Nations. One of which I talked about last week, and I think I miscited it, so I would like you to correct this in your notes. I realized after when I looked at the video that, because I do go back and actually watch it, as you know, because I put titling, other stuff in it, and I realized I actually miscited something. Luckily, I did not test you on this one, and that is the issue of sovereignty. Now, sovereignty is alluded to throughout the UN Charter, but in Article 2, Section 1, it says very clearly, quote, the organization is based upon the principle, and here's the key word, sovereign equality. Okay, so somebody tell me, unmute yourself and just tell me, what do you think that means? What do we mean by sovereign equality? Now that you know a little bit about sovereignty.
That the power is equally distributed.
Okay, so the power is equally distributed. So there's that, right? Well, that's going to be vitally important when we talk about the UN General Assembly next week. But what else is kind of implied by this wording? Wording is all diplomats. I will tell you, we're going to come back to over and over again. How do actual diplomats function? And obviously, I told you you're going to meet some of my friends who are diplomats later in this class. Words are the weapons of diplomats. Knowledge is the weapons of diplomats. So when you see something written, there's a reason why it's written the way it is.
I would think that it has to do with the Westphalian principles that basically allow for nation states to govern themselves. No one nation has power over the other. So United States can't tell Saudi Arabia, hey, don't do this. You're doing this. You're not supposed to do that. We can't tell them that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about sovereign equality, it is that idea that goes back to 1648. And it says, look, at the end of the day, yes, we all agree to get together in what we call a collective security arrangement. That's going to be one of the micro lectures I'll post for you by the end of the week, where it talks about the difference between collective security and collective defense. So I'm not going to get into the details here about it. But implicit in that is we're all agreeing to join this club, right? If you think of kind of the countries as members of a club. But at the end of the day, we can still determine what we want to do with our own life. I mean, the way to think about it is, let me give you just a practical example. Any of you guys belong to Costco? Right? Okay, so some of your hands went up. Does Costco control your life by you being a member of Costco? Jackson, well, yes, of course they do, because they sell you pickles in the big barrels. But at the end of the day, right? It's not like by you joining Costco that they can tell you then how then to live the rest of your life outside of Costco, right? Theoretically, yes, they have an impact obviously on resources and stuff like that. The UN is kind of the same way, and I say that because one of the biggest myths about the UN, and I kind of joked about it last week, but I do speaking engagements and media stuff all the time about the UN, and one of the interesting things that comes up all the time is this argument is the idea that Darlene had asked me if I could put the PowerPoint in presentation, but I try to, but it doesn't always come up, so I apologize. I will try to make it as big as possible. So let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay, where are you going? There we go. Nope. Hopefully that helps a little bit more. I'll see by next week if I can get it a little bit better, so that you can see a little bit better. I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. No, it's a good. No, always feel free if it because I have a separate on my iPad, so I can see it on my iPad what it looks like to you guys. And of course, the problem is it's a brand new iPad, so it looks really good. It may not look like that on your side always, so always feel free to ask. What is it? Oh, so sovereign equality. So yeah, so this idea is really that we can all, but is there, I want you, and it's not a question for you to answer at this point, but is there an inherent flaw to the UN by saying that everybody has the right to do whatever they want to because they're sovereign entities, right? did from the beginning the UN undermined its power, going back to Dag Hammarskjöld quote, by saying, oh, by the way, yes, we all agree to play by these rules, but we all agree that we all get to do what we want to in our own lives. See, that there's a very struggle of power there, so to speak. So that's going to become very important in a few minutes. We talked about the SDGs, but also WEAK-B is always about sort of really good prime examples. You guys know, of course, as I mentioned last week, there's an ongoing genocide in multiple countries around the world. So, for example, when the People's Republic of China, which is the official title of China at the UN, comes before the UN and people go, wait a minute, you're putting Uyghurs, these Muslim ethnic minority Muslims, in camps, re-education camps, and that's what they call it, not just the outside world. Isn't that a violation of all sorts of international law? And by you being a member of the UN, why are you doing that? And what does China say back? We are a sovereign entity. Look at Article 2, Section 1 of the UN Charter. We are sovereign. We have sovereign equality. How dare you tell us that? By the way, if you want to get a sense of the irony of that, is after the killing of George Floyd, the Chinese immediately came out and said, United States, remember how you're talking about how we treat our people? Let's turn to the issue of policing in the United States. And so kind of threw it back in our face. And of course, what did we say? We have the sovereign right to do whatever was in our borders, and you don't know what you're talking about. So it's this ongoing right struggle that starts right from the very beginning. Article 4, Section 1 and Section 2 also is kind of interesting because there's two pieces here. I'm not going to read the whole clause to you, but you can read it for yourself. But the pieces of underline are kind of, I would argue, the most important here. And that is, to be a member, you have to be open to all other peace-loving states who accept these obligations. In other words, if you join, you agree to play by our rules, which is we don't invade each other, we don't massacre each other, those kind of things. And that you're able to carry out those obligations, right? Now, why are these two things important? Because do we have countries after 1945 that wage war against other countries? Yeah. Not just the United States, go around the globe. So the question then becomes, well, wait a minute. Right from the beginning, right after the UN Charter was signed, we already had problems. And we did because we had the Cold War. So as the Cold War basically occurred almost right after the UN Charter starts, right? Everybody's great. The war is over. We're all hugging each other. And then reality sets in. And then you have this creation of what we call bipolar world between then the Soviet Union and the United States and our allies on both sides. But the problem is we all belong to this club where we all agree not to do bad stuff to each other. See the struggle here? So when a lot of you talked about sort of the flaws of the United Nations in your Think Perish here last week, I would argue that all of you were correct as well in most of your cases, because there are problems with the United Nations. It's not perfect, but if you go back to the Doug Hammarskjöld argument, remember he's the second Secretary General. So these arguments have already been going on. The whole Cold War was very much in place when he was Secretary General. Part of what he was arguing is that we never created this organization to solve everything. It has a utopian goal that we may never get to. And why we may not get there, others have argued, is because inherently we created these problems from the beginning. Because we took a bunch of self-interest member states and put them in an organization and said, you all agree to play fair. Oh, by the way, but you can also determine what you want to do, right? So it's these struggles between these different kinds of power going on. The able and willing to carry out the obligations, of course, has been really a sticking point for the United Nations since its founding, because as you can read for yourself in Section 2, the United Nations actually, to become a member, it's voted on by the General Assembly, which we'll talk more about next week in the next module, and the following with the Security Council. Well, in the General Assembly, that makes sense because now you have 193 member states, the bulk of which are from the developing world. But in the Security Council, you basically have the victors of World War II who control everything. So, for example, if there is geopolitics that influences a country in the Security Council who has veto power to say, no, we don't want them to be a member, they can do that. Keep that in mind because we're going to come back and talk about Palestine, for example. We're going to talk about Kosovo. These are all countries for all intents and purposes under a sort of a political science argument. But they are not member states of the United Nations. And part of why is because of the UN Charter and how it was created, and the power and also lack of power in some ways that the structure gives to member states who belong to it. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like for an example, for like how you say that the UN has like discrepancies in what they're trying to say about sovereignty, and like how it's like more like they're influencing that kind of sovereignty a little bit. Would that be like an example of like, say a part of a country is trying to separate and become its own separate country because they have a different type of people that live there?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
a really good example of this is what happened. The most recent member state of the United Nations is who? Does anybody know?
South Sudan?
South Sudan. So South Sudan was a group of people that were trying to succeed from Sudan, and the Sudanese government didn't want that. And then you tie in Darfur, and you tie in a bunch of other things going on there. And it really took the UN and also kind of the major power brokers of the world to come in and say, we're going to work with South Sudan and the Sudanese people to create a successful secession so they can become a country and then a UN member state. Now that is a perfect example of a good outcome, but that's not always the case. And kind of, Ruben, I think what you're kind of alluding to is, yeah, there are definitely successionist movements around the world who would love to be able to have a seat at the table at the United Nations. Let me give you one that's very, very close to home, and it's a group I actually know something about because I've done interviews with them, is the Zapatista movement in southern Mexico, in the places of Oaxaca and Chiapas, right? Here you have a successionist movement, this indigenous people who've been trying to, for all intents and purposes, really gain their power back from the Mexican government. The problem is that they don't have a seat at the table at the United Nations. So when we're talking about indigenous rights, who's the person talking about indigenous rights from Mexico? It's the Mexican government, not the people who actually are from the area that is primarily indigenous. So you do get sort of and we're going to talk a lot about that because the UN is structure-wise, I would argue, is a very interesting argument, and in the aftermath of World War II might have been the best solution, but also it really is a organization that has not transformed itself, as you're reading about, very well over time, because it doesn't include the voices of the voiceless as much as it should. So yeah.
Can you also relate that to like the francophones in Quebec?
Oh yeah, the Quebecois.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the French-speaking groups. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think there's multiple groups around the world we could really apply that to. Yeah, and definitely feel free as we talk about like Security Council, bring that back up because obviously I study conflict. I know a lot about secessionist movements around the globe, and so it's definitely something that has a big interest of mine as well.
My other class was teaching that, and when you were talking about it, it kind of just reminded me of it. So I was like, I wonder if that's applicable. Oh,
yeah, no, it's a really good question. It's an excellent question.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about then those conflicts of membership in other parts of the UN Charter and sort of sovereignty. So a couple of things I want to draw your attention to is the people who sort of believe the UN is this one world government, and they're putting fluoride in our water in some cases. There's some thoughts like that. Or they're running some sort of child trafficking sex ring. That's QAnon, by the way. Something I know a lot about because I'm being interviewed left and right about it because I do research on them.
WG1, WGA.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things is I always ask people when I talk to people, I'm like, have you even looked at the UN Charter, right? What does the Charter actually say? And of course, most people haven't. So in Article 103, right, one of the later articles in the UN Charter, there's an argument about, there's an argument that has been made historically that the U.S., by joining the UN or other, you're giving up sovereignty. Well, obviously in Article 2, right away it says, no, you're not. But also, once again, in Article 103, then there becomes this sort of struggle, right? Because yes, you're not giving up sovereignty, but in Article 103, you say, look, by being a member of this organization, you actually are saying, look, I'm a part of this other organization, let's say NATO. And if NATO does something that contradicts what you're supposed to be doing as a UN member state, under the UN Charter, the UN Charter is supposed to prevail. Now, that's what's on paper. So, for example, let's say NATO says you need to bomb Sudan. That's not happened, but let's say that was the case. And then the UN says, UN Security Council or the UN says, no, why would you do that? Because you're a member state of the UN and we don't agree with that. Then there becomes a struggle between you being a part of that. The term that was used last week, and I think it was Ruben brought it up, is intergovernmental organization, remember? And I said IGOs, not NGOs, IGOs, intergovernmental organizations. The UN is one, but there's a whole range of regional ones as well. NATO is a good example of that. The Organization of American States, or OAS, which is Latin American countries, Asian Pacific Economic Community, APEC, and there's a variety of other ones around the world. The European Union, I know some of you've heard of from the news. So the question then becomes is, look, I'm going to be a part of this I'm going to be a part of this club, but I'm also a member of this other club. And then the question then becomes from that is, okay, I'm now a member of both, but what if this other club says I can't do that because it's going to hurt what I'm supposed to be doing by being a part of this other organization? And under the charter, you're supposed to allow the UN Charter to prevail. Now, generally speaking, it's not been a huge struggle, but there have been some issues because this comes back to global governance and globalization in a larger sense. Because the problem is, what if you belong to multiple different organizations and some of their decisions contradict what you've agreed to be a member of the United Nations? It gets really sticky. Now, that's on paper. In real life, generally speaking, people ignore this article. They just go, don't know what you're talking about. I'm a member of OAS, said for me to do something. I'm also a member of the UN. Yeah, it's fine. It's not going to be a problem. But it is potentially under international law kind of an issue. And here's an interesting part of it. Nobody who has joined the United Nations has ever left the United Nations. The only time that we've had member states change is when we had the end of the Cold War, for example, and the USSR became dismantled. All those various pieces became members of the United Nations. But there hasn't been anybody left. Regional organizations, we have had some people leave those regional intergovernmental organizations. So just keep in mind that on paper, there is this continuing struggle. And once again, as I said, one of the biggest things we'll keep coming back to is sovereignty, because you have the right to do what's in your best interest as a country. That leads us to Article 51. And in Article 51, and I kind of did these backwards, but it's the one that I think hits more home for us here in the United States, is literally says, and I will read this part because it's very important, nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense. So in other words, what the UN Charter says is, if you are attacked, you have the right to fight back. You don't need to wait for the UN Security Council to meet and for diplomats to talk about it for 3 weeks, and then you take action. Because what the founders realized is that didn't make any sense at all. Particularly pre-technology we have today, where it may take some time for people to congregate, get together, talk about the issue. Also, diplomats are talkers. And they will talk things out. And the problem is that seconds and minutes can go along, and in a big conflict, that can lead to many deaths. Now, that was why that article was put in place. How it's used today, though, relates to two terms I would like you to know, and that is preventative action and preemptive action. Preventative action is the argument that I think you're going to hit me. I don't have proof of that, but before you can, I'm going to smack you instead. Right? So put this in I'm sure some of you have siblings, and I'll give you an example of my life. I grew up with a bunch of boys in the Deep South, so we used to beat on each other on a regular basis. So my younger brother, in a preventative action environment, it would have been this. You've never hurt me, but in my head, all of a sudden, my reality is you may hurt me, so I punch you in the face before you can do anything to me. I don't have pre-existing knowledge that you're going to do that, but preventatively, I hit you. Okay, that's preventative action. Preemptive action is I have some evidence that you may hurt me. So in other words, you have a weapon in your hand and we're standing in front of each other. Well, I'm going to hit you before you hit me. Self-defense, right? Would be the argument. Under international law, preemptive action is legal. Preventative action is not, per the UN Charter as well as other pieces of international law. But here's the question I want to ask you. How do you know whether the intent of somebody? How do you know the intent of a country? Do you wait till they build nuclear weapons and go, well, they have them and we know, so now we're going to take action? Or, right? And so Crystal asked what is legal. The preemptive action is legal under international law, preemptive. Preventative is technically not, according to most legal scholars. So let me go back to my analogy with my brother. So if I argue to my mother, well, I hit him because I know he would pick up a weapon if he had the capability, or he had a weapon, he hit it, and he threw it down before you came in. Do you see where it gets really sticky? It's not black and white. It's very, very gray. So where that becomes very problematic is in this day and age with technology, we have become very efficient at killing people. And I say that in a very sort of blunt way. One of the best examples of that is the use of aerial drones. And I don't mean the drones you buy from, to play in your backyard, but the Predator drone, like you see here in the slides. I live near March Air Force Base, and we have a lot of drones that fly out of March Reserve Base. So I see them in the air all the time, doing all sorts of stuff. And I've seen them overseas as well. And so if you then use those to target individuals, and then you make the argument, we had the right to kill that person, not a country, but a person, because we know they were going to take action against us. Then the question is that, are you covered under Article 51? And there's not a lot of clarity, to be very honest with you, even in the UN today. One of the best examples of this is hopefully some of you probably know this gentleman or you've seen him on news. And this is Soleimani. He was a general. He was actually part of the Al-Quds Iranian guard, as well as a major general. And there's evidence, at least from the United States intelligence community, that he was the person behind a lot of the militias in Iraq that killed U.S. soldiers. And this was over a long period of time, as well as other actions around the world. He was killed by the United States using a Predator drone not very long ago. And one of the very first things the Iranians said is, wait a minute, you killed an Iranian official in Iraq. He was being killed as he was leaving a base in Iraq. You killed somebody in Iraq from another country. That's preventative. That's illegal. And of course, the US, we said, no, he had been involved in this action beforehand. He wasn't a state actor. He wasn't acting in that capacity. He was acting as a non-state actor. And so therefore, we had the right to take the action we did. And by the way, I'm not pointing fingers at Trump, because we did the same thing under Obama. We did the same things under George W. And actually, this kind of action, pre-drones, we've been doing for some time, historically throughout multiple presidents. And other countries have as well. So the question then becomes, when does the UN Charter really play a role, and what times do we just ignore it? And I don't have the answer to that. That's something that you'll struggle with throughout this entire class and probably beyond. I have friends that work on security issues at the United Nations, and they are frustrated by the Charter routinely, because there's what was developed in 1944 and 45 and the reality of the world we live in today. Because one of the arguments is the UN Charter didn't take into account non-state actors like terrorists, like other types of groups like that, or actors. So how do you deal with that? And the UN, I will tell you, is still struggling with it on a day-to-day basis.
I just had a question, since this is kind of a multi-layer issue. This is a state actor question, kind of, but dealing with non-state actors. Like, say Anwar al-Awlaki, he was a U.S. citizen that was killed in a drone strike by the U.S. in 2011. I believe it was, I don't remember where they killed him, but it was somewhere in the Middle East.
It was in Yemen. Yeah, it was in Sana'a, in Yemen.
Okay, I wasn't sure. That was in another country on a non-state actor terrorist group, but it was a U.S. citizen. What makes that so complex? I don't know if I
Well, that's a much longer conversation than I'll have in class. The short of it is you have multiple layers. You have international law. You have the issue of U.S. domestic law. The argument the U.S. made, and that happened under President Obama, is he was a known terrorist. He had been involving, in fact, he was seen as the ideologue behind these groups that have been killing U.S. citizens as well as other people, including other Muslims around the world. And so therefore we had the right to act out. That's sort of the argument on international law. Domestic was he had taken, there is an argument made under internet, and I'm not a lawyer, but obviously I know a little bit about the law in this area, is there's an argument made by some that as a citizen of a state, if you take action against that state, they can revoke your citizenship. By the way, that includes the United States.
Okay.
And so that's been part of it, as well as if he was stripped of his citizenship, then is he an open target would be the question. Yeah. But
Thank you.
Email me that and I'll tell you more of the details, because that's a whole bunch of layers. But it's a good question in this context, right? So let me move forward then a little bit. And that is, I want to come back to, now that we've talked sort of about the the charter and its flaws and its strengths, I want to talk about then, let's go back, kind of step back to the bigger picture, global governance. And one of the things you'll find is there's always going to be this struggle between sort of global governance, this idea of we need to work together to solve these, what's referred to in academia and other places as wicked problems. And that's why I put quotes around it. Wicked problems are basically problems that are not simply solved by one discipline or one type of practitioner or one type of policy. They often take a variety of different inputs, a variety of different solutions because of the fluidness of what they are. So examples of wicked problems basically is what the UN deals with: inequality, racism, conflict. If any of you guys are taking the Social Science 3000 or 3001 class, which you're probably not if you're in my class, but if you are or have friends that are, those classes are actually built around just looking at wicked problems of conflict, inequality, a variety of other things, the environment. So the UN, in part, today has kind of morphed into how do we balance between the sovereignty and the desires of the UN member states, but also at the same time trying to solve these wicked problems that really need all of our work on it. And what gets in the way there, by the way, is two layers of things, what I call political baggage. That's not really an academic term, it's just what I call it. And that is, every country has its own baggage, has its own issues, right? The way to think about it is member states are no different than people trying to get into a relationship together, right? Everybody has something going on. Everybody has some sort of baggage they bring into that relationship. Countries are the same way. Could be cultural, it could be historical, it could be because of how they were developed, because of colonialism or neocolonialism. There's a variety of factors there. So all the UN member states have their own political baggage, and they're bringing that to the table. So at the same time, they're trying to solve, for example, sustainable development and come up with solutions that are very wicked in the sense of how fluid they are and how hard they are to solve. They're also trying to do it and appease what they do, because the job, and please write this down, it's very important. Every diplomat in the world, their job, first and foremost of every diplomat in the world, doesn't matter what country they're from, is to promote and protect the national interest. And when I say national interest, I don't mean necessarily the interest of the people, but I mean those that are in power, the government, right? So every diplomat around the world, their primary job is to protect the national interest. Does that mean diplomats always agree with what they're doing? No. There are people, friends of mine, that work in the current administration for the U.S. State Department. They've worked through multiple administrations that can't stand President Trump and his policies, but their mind is, I'm here serving the American people and the U.S. government. That's what I do, whether I agree with it or not. I remember a few years ago, I took a group down to meet the Israeli consulate, diplomats that work out of LA at the Israeli consulate, and the political affairs officer made a really interesting comment. He was originally born in Argentina and grew up there, but then he's has dual citizenship in the state of Israel, so he's an Israeli diplomat. And he actually said to my students, as diplomats, we don't always do the things that we agree with. We do the things we've been told to do. And I remember my students being shocked by the honesty of that. I was too, to be honest with you. But it's true. The problem is that, so let's say I, as a diplomat, if I was a U.S. diplomat from the United States, I may not agree with what I've been told to do, my marching orders, but when I walk into that room, I'm promoting whatever the U.S. government policy is. Now you may say, what does that matter? Because can that affect, think psychology. Some of you are psych majors. Think psychology or sociology. Could that, you think, affect how those diplomats interact with each other? If you're coming in, you're like, well, I'm just doing my job. You're just doing your job. Yeah. What's interesting is if you ever go to the United Nations, the area down by the United Nations in New York City is called Turtle Bay. Turtle Bay. And that area, prior to the UN being built there, was a meatpacking industry area. It was slaughterhouses. I know it's ironic that UN's built in what used to be slaughterhouses. And so if you go down there on any given day, obviously not right now because of COVID, but before all of this, you could walk into any bar and you would find diplomats from countries who hate each other, maybe even at war with each other, sitting at the bar together having a drink or having dinner. Because in their minds, they said, I'm putting aside the fact that I have this political baggage as a state and I want to build this relationship. The problem is that could be your best friend. You then go back to the UN, guess what? They could be your sworn enemy because now you're promoting an interest that says this isn't, the person I should be working with. There's lots of photos you'll find. I remember being outside the UN and finding Israeli and Palestinian and Syrian diplomats hanging outside because all what they're doing is smoking. This is when they stopped smoking inside the UN itself, when they banned it. So they go outside and they're all sitting around. If you're smokers, you'll appreciate that, right? I used to be a smoker. Is whether you know somebody or not, if there's a group of smokers, you all go and hang out together and smoke together and talk, right? Same thing would happen at the UN, right? So you have these layers of relationships that really complicate what the UN does. And one of the best examples of that is really what you're going to be focusing on for your real life application exercise and what you read about for all intents and purposes this week, and we'll continue to come back to, and that is the development of the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, when you're reading the material for this week, I'm sure some of you are like, I don't understand some of these words. It's okay. The point is that it's really kind of working through that. What are the processes? What are the people? Remember, this is a social science type class, right? Even though it's geography, we study human beings. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, what Pam Chasik and the other authors are doing is they're trying to paint a picture both of the history of the SDGs, but also what led to this very complicated process to get to deal with this very wicked problem. And the Millennium Development Goals are no different, okay? So, let's see how much time we have. Okay, so let me talk very briefly about the SDGs and sort of, given that context, how global governance impacts them, now knowing what you know. So at the end of the day, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Millennium Development Goals, and all the things that are associated that we're going to keep coming back through that book this term and throughout the class, is they're trying to solve development issues. And development, prior to the addition of this idea of sustainability, was simply mostly driven by economics, which is you have a better economy, you can develop. That was sort of the argument and the mindset, actually, in development work and at the UN for like 40-something years. In the last about 20 years, at least 25 years, there's been a greater focus on this piece called sustainability. This is the idea that we can develop in different parts of our lives as human beings and also leave a place that our children can use and their children's children. In other words, that it becomes sustainable. That's what sustainable development is. But it's not just simply economics. If you're going to have that, you also have to satisfy the social realm of life. So in this area, it would be things like gender equality, equality based on ethnicity, status, sexual orientation, right? All different aspects of social life. Economics is pretty straightforward, right? Is you want to have stronger economies, trading, like all the factors that play into economics, and the environment, because the argument is today is That's great if you have equality amongst people and you have a strong economy, but if it's tearing up the environment, that's not sustainable. In other words, yes, it's okay for now, but what does that look like 10, 15, 20 years down the road? And as you probably were reading in the book, when they started working on the SDGs, that was the big struggle between the developed countries of the world, the United States, Canada, Australia, all these countries that have, and Western Europe, that have developed economies and can go, hey, let's have more green economy. And then you have those countries that were just emerging, China, Brazil, India, right? These countries that basically were using fossil fuels primarily. The problem is that they were all kind of fighting over this argument, over this question of sustainability, this wicked problem. The initial solution, as you know from what you've read so far, is the development of these, which is the Millennium Development Goals. And the Millennium Development Goals are just simply those 8 principles that said, here's the things we're going to work on, and then we will reevaluate and see whether or not we've done a good job. So it's things like poverty and hunger, primary education, because all of these pieces they saw as part of sustainable development. When they reevaluated, there was success in some areas, not success in some other areas. And as a result of that, and what we're going to be talking about throughout this class and in the second book you're reading, this KCO book, is it's through that reevaluation of the Millennium Development Goals and what worked and what didn't, that you had the development of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, they expanded from basically 8 to 17 and include things that were not originally there. So, for example, my area of research and what I do, peace and justice and strong institutions. That was not even discussed under the Millennium Development Goals. Now, you may be asking, what does this all matter? Because think back to how the UN was founded, what we studied last week, what you were introduced to, what we've talked about today, the struggle between the individual member states and their needs and their interests versus the interest of the whole. How do you balance that is the question I ask you. How do you balance between the collective and the individual? Does that sound vaguely familiar from everyday life? It's something that not just member states struggle with, it's human beings in general, right? This idea that, oh, I want to be more secure, but in that I may end up harming other people in society. Well, member states deal with that as well every day, and the SDGs are a great example of that. And the fact that we even have 17 development goals today is pretty amazing. But it took a lot of work and a lot of years and a lot of stress and coffee and smoking and a variety of other things by diplomats to really move beyond this original, really what I would argue is an archaic structure of the United Nations, and sort of use pieces of it that worked and jettison the other through other processes. Okay? We're not going to get a chance to do that. So, last few minutes of class today, I want to talk about what you're going to be doing next. So, based on what we've covered this week and what you've been doing in a couple of the micro lectures you'll see in the next day or so, you're going to have starting, today's Wednesday. Geez, the week's already passed. Tomorrow at 6 a.m., there will be posted in section 88 for Palm Desert and, of course, section 1 for the San Bernardino campus, because I have both of you guys together in one class this term, is there will be 4 discussion boards in module number 1 in that folder. Here's the key, and I'll send these same directions out. It's also in the syllabus too, but you will only pick one of the discussion boards as your focus for the real-life application exercise. Pick whichever one makes the most sense to you. So click on it. You don't even have to post. Just look at what the initial thread by me is. You don't do this in your country groups. This is across the class. Okay? Now, some of you might end up, in the same country group in the same forum, but that doesn't matter. There'll be 4 different situations. You need to answer those questions that I pose to you. The question is going to come up, is there a certain word count, page limit? No. However much it takes you to give your answer. That's the most important part. On there is a rubric, which I will also post for you as well, but it should come up whenever you go to click on the discussion board, but I'll post as a PDF separate in there as well so you can look at it. This is what I'm going to be using to grade your post. By the way, I use a rubric for the Think Pair Share as well. So what you're going to be graded on is timely and active participation. So in other words, did you post by the due date? which by the way is Saturday at 11 p.m. is the deadline. So you have a couple days to work on it. Did you actively reply to people? Now this one, unlike the Think Pair Share last week, you will not be able to post, or you will not be able to, see other people's posts until you've posted. By the way, that's what was supposed to happen with Think Pair Share, but I messed up and forgot to click that button. Okay. But we may stick to the other way for the Think Pair Share. It kind of works out really well, I think. So I want you to be thoughtful. I want you to really think through the question, maybe just jot down some notes. One of the things I recommend is just write it out in your processor, your answer beforehand, because you can cut and paste and throw it into the text box. That way you can look through, make sure it makes sense. You can edit it before you post it. So that's 33%. Remember, everything is every assignment is 100, out of 100 points. So 33 points out of that 100 fits here. Thoughtful and complete response to the original thread. In other words, did you maybe include stuff from the readings, stuff from lecture, and real life? Feel free to bring in real life examples, even ones that we haven't talked about that you know something about from other classes or your own life, right? Everybody brings their own knowledge coming into this class. Then, did you make a thoughtful contribution to community learning? This is about what? Did you pose thoughtful questions or replies? What I don't want to see in these is what I saw in the Think Pair Share for the first time, and we get better as we do this throughout class, so don't worry about that, is it's not just simply you replying, that was a really good idea. That's not a reply. That's what I call an attaboy. Okay? Your job is to present some ideas. Now, one of the things I have posted for you, and I'm going to send an email just highlighting this because I'm not sure if everybody saw it. I've given you a new button on Blackboard that say Tools for Helping. Underneath there's a document that actually gives you examples of what would be considered really good replies, really good posts. Okay? And it gives you things to think about when you're doing this assignment and the Think Pair Share, as well as like a sample of what you might want to put in. Okay? Use all of this. I also put a thing up there for note taking. I gave you a whole bunch of different tools I put together over the last few days for you. Okay, so feel free to use those. So you're going to do that post, you're going to do a reply, and you're done. That's the only assignment you have for this week. You did your quiz last week. Then we do this on week B. And then, fast forward here. Whoops, where are we at? So you'll do the real life application exercise. That's starting tomorrow at 6 a.m., closes on the 5th, 11 p.m. There's already videos under the videos for concept exploration. Oh, it's not introduction. It should be introduction. Sorry, typo there. And there'll be some micro lectures. There'll be one on, it's like 3 to 5 minutes that I put together that will be uploaded by tomorrow on the difference between collective security and collective defense. All of those pieces you can use in the post. Also, that is stuff that is possibly going to be on the midterm. So you want to make sure you kind of view all of it. But I've already talked about the books. They're all now viewable. Do remember, we keep on moving on. So even though you're done, once you're done with this assignment for this material for now, starting on Monday, we move into module number 2. And you do your Think Pair Share just like last time. Okay, and now that you have some experience on it, I'll start upping the game. Because now I know what quality of writing and thought you can put into it. So the questions will get a little more in depth to make you think a little bit more as we move on. Okay. Remember, the next module focuses on the General Assembly. So we're going to kind of shift from the bigger picture to sort of nuts and bolts, but also how does that then apply back to these other issues? And then, of course, as always, I'll see your lovely faces. It's lovely faces. Is that condescending? I apologize. Might be a microaggression. I apologize for that. Is a live virtual session next Wednesday on September 9th. Remember, Monday, you do not have class, but we don't meet anyway. But don't show up to your other classes. It's Labor Day. So you have a few days to kind of work on it, on the Think Pair Share, because you don't have class on Monday. Any other questions?
Yes, Professor, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned that every week we were having the quiz assignments. Is next week, are we going to have one for that Thursday?
Yeah,
Or
so
Wednesday,
so
sorry.
the process is basically the same, right? Is
Okay.
week A, you have the Think Pair Share, we have our meeting, and then of course you have your quiz at the end of the week. So that there'll be another quiz next week on the material. And then, of course, the following week, week B, is similar to this week, where you have micro lectures, as well as some other videos I post, our live session, and then, of course, the real life application exercise. So the structure each week for most weeks will always be the same. There's a couple of times where you don't have real life application exercises because of the way the scheduling works out, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do the midterm and you'd be doing multiple things. So I try to space it out as best as possible.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem. Other questions?
Professor?
Yes.
So for this week, we just have to do our real life application and that's it?
Yep, that's all you have for this week. Of course, make sure you've done the readings for this week because you don't want to get behind. But yeah, the only actual assignment is the real life application exercise.
Okay.
Yeah, I try, because every week A is a little bit heavier. What you have to do, I try to make week B a little bit less heavy.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question, Professor. On the rubric, it says post replies and ask questions 4 or more times throughout the week. In order to get that, to exceed that level, what do you mean by that? Like reply 4 times?
Say. I'm so sorry, you cut out there. Say that one more time.
Yeah, so it says right here on the rubric, for the first one, timely and active participation, it says we have to ask 4 or more questions throughout the week to get, the best.
That is a typo. I will go back to that. You only have to reply once. Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure, but
sorry
I thought it was only once. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, the rubric I use in other classes is very similar, so I probably just didn't think about it. I apologize. I'll go back and
So just
correct
one.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you only have to do 1 post, 1 reply. That's all you have to do. And yes, you do have Labor Day off on Monday, but this is a virtual class, so you continue working. Okay? The good news is that hopefully you won't have live lectures for other classes on Monday. Okay. Other questions, concerns?
I just had it went back to your lecture a little bit. I had a little bit of a question with the preventable versus preemptive.
Right.
Where would, and I'm sure we'll probably study this when we get to the Security Council, but where would cyber attacks and hacking and stuff fall into that?
Remind me of that, because it's a good question. The short answer is the UN really doesn't know. It's actually an ongoing debate they're having. Cybersecurity, cyber attacks have actually been on the UN Security Council's provisional agenda every year, at least 2-3 times. As we'll talk about, the UN General Assembly and its bodies meet only for certain months out of the year. The UN Security Council meets 365 days a year. So if you're the rep from your country on that, you literally live across the street at the delegate apartments. You're there all the time. So there actually has been a lot of conversations about that, because then the question is it preventable? Is it preemptive? Yeah, it's not and this is where non-state actors, trolls online working for foreign governments possibly, and they happen around the world, by the way. It's not to point a finger at Russia, because guess what? Other countries also have trolls and bots. So,
and it would be really easy for the government itself to then say oh, that wasn't us, that was private citizens and stuff. So where does that, it's not black and white, it's very gray.
Not. And that's one of the biggest problems is we kind of live in this environment that the UN, when it was founded, really isn't the world we live in today completely. It's pieces of it, but it's still not. So there's that struggle. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem.